My name is Eric Myers. I'm a Government Affairs Director for Minneapolis Area Realtors, and I've been in government affairs for about 20 years, representing realtors since February 2008, and representing the Minneapolis Area Realtors since 2017. So, um, long history in government affairs, and worked at the Minnesota House, worked at the Minnesota Senate, worked on local elective campaigns for public office, worked on a statewide issue advocacy campaign, and worked with a large advocacy practice and a large law firm as well. So pretty varied experience. Um, there's some, again, this is a weekly production, so there are new elements here and there's some older elements. I've started to try to take out some of the older elements and put some additional ones in. So if there's any hiccups, um, I apologize for those in advance. If there's any questions, please go ahead and raise your hand, and we can take them throughout the presentation and at the end. So I'm quite flexible when it comes to that. No problem. Let's get something answered when we can. There's a lot to dig out from. I would say even next week, this is going to substantially change again. So hopefully we're thinking about seeing how we've already changed the name to Gab with Your GAD from a previous title version, and there may be some changes coming to this program in the future too, and we're considering how often to offer it and et cetera, but stay tuned for some of those. So changes, and it's a very fluid moment right now, so I'm sure you can all are experiencing the same thing. So let's just walk through this here. My role during the pandemic and civil unrest is to try to monitor on your behalf what's happening at the U.S. House, what's happening with the U.S. Senate, what's happening in the Minnesota House and the Minnesota Senate, what the governor's executive orders are, if there's any emergency orders in those, what the mayor's emergency orders are, and how that impacts you and your business and how you go about your day. So I'm trying to bring that information to you. Plus, keep track of HUD, IRS, Treasury, and others, and then monitoring of protest, violence, curfews, and other government response. Just things you might need to know as you're headed out there to meet the consumer, the home buying and selling consumer public. We have these three resources, and you can link to them: the State Association, the Minneapolis Association, and then the National Association. And there's a lot of great guidance on a lot of great topics if you follow these links all the way through. Stay-at-home orders. The governor's, realtors were essential, and we all know that. The governor's emergency orders expire on June 12th. And so I was just reading today that there's likely going to be a legislative special session this Friday, and there would probably be an attempt to continue those emergency pandemic orders, those emergency powers. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that's important soon. Stay safe is still in effect, and for a vast majority of people, that means if you can work from home, you still should. We will walk through a number of slides too that talk about reopening. Of course, last week we saw, and the week prior, we saw curfews and highway closures and other impacts from civil unrest. So just kind of be updated and aware on some of those. Minnesota Stay Safe is still in place. There is testing available, and there are testing locations throughout the community. If you click that link, and if you're symptomatic and you want to get tested, you can click through there and find out where to get tested. Safety at home. They're concerned about domestic violence during this time, and so they're providing some resources here. This is information from the governor's Stay Safe order. So information here, they're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, call or text, and basically they're trying to reinforce you shouldn't have, just because you're ordered to stay home and to stay safe doesn't mean you should stay somewhere that's unsafe. And so they want to make sure you have resources for you, or your clients have resources for that. Unemployment support, a link through to the web to the deed site is provided here. I do have it on pretty good authority that Minnesota has already exhausted all of its unemployment funds in its own funding um, pile, but that shouldn't impact the payment of benefits because, of course, the federal government backstops state programs. But I do know that the state has run dry on unemployment funds, and now all the dollars being paid through Minnesota through deed for Minnesota unemployment claims are all federal dollars. That was an update in the last few days here. Mental health, if you're worried about someone, yourself or a loved one, and you want to talk, there's some links to some mental health resources here as well. So just letting you know that you're not alone in this challenge. There's, if pandemic wasn't enough, now we have, we have a very critical incident with the death of George Floyd, and then we have the riots that have followed as well. So you're not alone. There are resources out there, and there's a really nice click through here to some very good resources too. So if you or someone needs to access that stuff, please do. Staying safe, childcare has been greatly impacted. So there's a link to some childcare stuff here. Minnesota Housing webpage, there's a link there. Emergency food support, and how to get on SNAP for folks that maybe have never done that before or had previously and need to get back on SNAP. There's some information about SNAP there, and then link to the state's COVID-19 website. And then just the last thing about wearing masks in public. I know some people do this, and some people are not doing this. And you go out and you're kind of getting a visual head count in your mind about who's doing it and who's not. But 10 to 50% of all virus carriers are asymptomatic, and so wearing a mask does help control the virus and has been shown to help lower the overall spread. Breaking news today was that testing has been up really high, and new cases are starting to plateau, and so we're on the plateau side, or starting to come down the other side of the mountain. For the last couple of weeks, we've still been climbing in terms of total case count, and now we're starting to plateau, and we're seeing a lot less hospitalizations as a result as well. So hopefully this means we are on the correct side of it, and everyone's talking about the curve and where we are on the curve, and hopefully the worst is behind us in terms of overall numbers. Reopening, as you're aware, many people last week and over the weekend were able to go out and do some outdoor dining. Indoor dining is going to return this week on June 10th, and with some limitations, and you can see those limitations here. 50% occupancy, no more than I actually have another slide for this as well, but gyms, personal fitness, yoga studios, martial arts opening up to 25 capacity, indoor entertainment venues and theaters and concert halls, 25% capacity, recreational indoor entertainment venues, bowling alleys, arcades, and museums, 25% capacity, and personal services such as salons, tattoos, parlors, and barbershops, 50% capacity. And then also that in every single one of these examples, there's a requirement that you have a plan, and that plan, involves cleaning between each use of and signing up and taking care that if you're sitting in a barbershop, you're not sitting in a chair immediately next to the person that's next waiting. So about 6 feet still recommended, obviously, and even as you're waiting, as these things open back up. Places of worship and increase in occupancy rates to 50% there as well. I mentioned the June 10th openings. Bars and restaurants for indoor service can reopen as long as they have implemented a COVID-19 preparedness plan, and they have a plan that ensures 6 feet minimum distance, and then they limit that occupant capacity to no more than 50% and no more than 250 persons. Obviously, that's going to vary by your space, what you can accept, and your normal occupancy loads are going to apply as well. So if you had a space that was never that large to begin with, then your space will be adjusted downwards from there, 50%. limit the table service to 4 persons or 6 if part of one family unit. So they're trying to limit the total number of unrelated persons sitting next to each other. And this just makes good sense in terms of trying to control the spread, requiring reservations and requiring workers to wear masks. And then on and on here with gym studios, fitness centers, and those similar thresholds here as well. But this is the deed guidance from the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. This is the deed guidance straight from the governor's office on these openings for June 10th. A little more on June 10th, and then seated and recreational entertainment, and then you see 25% and the 250 there, and then personal services, salons, barbershops, tattoo parlors. This might be a little bit of a repeat from that one slide there, but making sure that they are covered in this June 10th order. Peacetime, the peacetime emergency had been extended and is good until June 12th. We're coming up on the June 12th date. It sounds like the Minnesota legislative session will convene for a special session this Friday, and I would anticipate as part of that process, there would be a discussion of the legislature whether the governor is going to continue his peacetime emergency or whether the legislature needs to approve that. There's some questions there. The reason it's important is the peacetime emergency directly impacts, let's see if I have it on, this other order here, the Minnesota Governor's Executive Order 2014, which suspended evictions and rents recovery during the peacetime emergency. So this is the time frame, peacetime emergency. Let's see if I can pointer options here. Laser point. This is right here, peacetime emergency. This is the timeline. So if the peacetime emergency expires, this order would no longer apply, and you would potentially be able to return to suspend to evictions and rents of recovery, meaning you could send letters to your tenants telling them that they're in violation of their lease and that they haven't paid the rent or whatever the situation is. But if this order stays in place so this is through June 12th, you can't do that. If the order peacetime emergency is not extended, then you would be able to go back and you would be able to work with your tenants, send them those letters, and you could eventually end up evicting someone. But if the peacetime emergency continues or they extend it, then you would not be able to evict somebody. So go next. This was from last week, but the confirmed case count is now well over 25,000. Here's the death count for Minnesota, and you can actually you could Google this Minnesota COVID dashboard, and you could get these numbers at any given time, and they're being updated, every few seconds, and then you could actually check by county as well. I'm actually currently in Anoka County, which has a relatively large case count as well. So, but we would expect that being close to the Twin Cities and being still fairly dense overall. This was the dials that they were originally using in terms of reopening things. Places of worship have been added, and obviously this week, if this was updated, then the single shops, but the larger department stores have started to open up as well. The ones that were previously closed, Kohl's is now open. So these dials have been moved to the right, and places of worship 50% as well. There is a chart, and right now they're working on phase 3. That's where we're at. Phase 3 is this June 10th date and what things are available. If you land at this page, Minnesota's Stay Safe Minnesota, you could look at this entire chart, and then you can click on each of these items and see what's available, what's open, what's not, what the restrictions are for now. So right now, last week was June 1, so they were looking at phase 2 this week, June 10th. They're looking at phase 3, and phase 4 is a lot of it's yet to be determined, and we would be working on that. The state's working on that in terms of what's coming up next in the future. This list goes on, and there's lots of different items, and you can click on each one and figure out what's going on for that sector or that program. I did double check this link just now today, and this link does still take you to this matrix, so you could review it. Obviously, just again, some more iconography: wash your hands, get tested, stay 6 feet apart, wear a mask, stay home when you're able, and work from home when you're able. Those are all still in place right now. Just a note on this: the Minneapolis area realtors, has no in-person, going to have some information out in the newsletter that are going to have no in-person classes through the rest of the year. Now, there is one caveat to that. The board has made that decision, but they're also going to do a month-to-month reassessment. So whereas the decision has been made that there's not going to be any in-person events through the rest of the year, they're going to continue to monitor the situation, and there may be updates along the way. But just to give you a sense of what to look for from the association. Obviously, there was an incredibly sad situation with the death of George Floyd a little over, on Memorial Day. And so just the reaction to this, Minneapolis Association of Realtors did put out this statement and did put out this iconography. The Minneapolis Association of Realtors is also working on a rebuilding page, and there will be more information on that. That page is built, and there will be kind of a launch on that. Look for that this week. I don't want to say any more because it's apparently it's a pretty powerful and impactful message and statement and resources and commitment to keep working on the things that need to improve for everyone in our community. So just be aware of that. There was some, last week we were dealing with the actual orders from the Minneapolis curfew. This doesn't still apply. I should probably get this slide out, but they were in place. NAR has developed a guide for you to work with consumers about forbearance. If you have consumers that are going through the unemployment situation, they're having a difficult time paying their mortgage, and a lot of it starts with contacting your lender, but and starting that negotiation. But this is a good time for realtors to reach out and realtors to talk with their clients directly about what their options are so that they're ready for that phone call. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think there's a lot of information out there that that could steer people wrong. And I think a real trusted person in the transaction or trusted person in the home ownership experience is that connection that a person has with their realtor. So NAR developed this guide to help you start the conversation with those folks that happen to be in your sphere or your community, people you know, or even in your family. There was a concern a while back that FHA was anyone that went through forbearance on a government-backed mortgage wasn't going to be able to do a purchase finance or wasn't going to be able to do a refinance after having gone through forbearance. But FHA has announced that after 3 months of successful mortgage payments, 3 in a row after the end of the forbearance period, anyone that's in a government-backed mortgage would be available for a new purchase. It's not going to be exclusionary to keep you from a new purchase mortgage or a refinance mortgage if it's government-backed and you've completed 3 payments after the forbearance period ends. After that point, it'll be treated as if it never occurred, at least from FHA. That's obviously not the same for conventional, and individual consumers need to be checking with their lenders on what their program is offering. There continues to be a lot of talk about additional unemployment or additional stimulus payments coming, but there hasn't been any movement from Congress on that yet. For the first time ever, though, in the history of unemployment in this country, 1099 workers were eligible for and are eligible for unemployment insurance. That was authorized in the CARES Act, and the specific words for the section that makes that applicable is pandemic unemployment assistance. More information about that on filing for unemployment here at the website. More information about PUA here. No further word on stimulus checks yet at this point. IRS is still working and getting back up to speed. And in the last week, IRS in Kentucky, Texas, and Utah had begun returning to normal operations, and their agents were returning to the physical locations. And so 11,000 IRS employees have been coming back to work. That's not a full complement, but so if you're waiting on some communication from IRS or something else, or back and forth with them, just know that they've just started back to work within the last week or so. Here's some charts about unemployment and what the unemployment rate has done, compared unemployment through April compared to the Great Depression, and unemployment by race, who's been impacted here throughout this crisis, by education level, and then which sectors have been hit the hardest. And as you can see, 8.152 million job losses negative in March and April for the leisure and hospitality industries that have been severely hit. Monthly unemployment rate from Deed. This chart will show you March, April, and May through May, and it will actually show you that Minnesota trended under same trend line as the national average, but actually trending under the U.S. average. This is pretty typical of a very strong sector, employment sector overall in the Twin Cities area, but trending along the same line, but not as bad as the U.S. on average. Monthly unemployment rates, February through April, and you can see kind of in our 5-state region how we compare, and Minnesota's purple, and Wisconsin here by April is red, and other colors as well. So you can kind of see how Minnesota has fared throughout. This came from the Federal Reserve Bank. Unemployment rate by Minnesota County, 0, 5, 10, 15, 20 with the dark purple, and you can see the county impact throughout the state. So clearly better than in an elongated unemployment situation that could have occurred or may have occurred with a different type of start. Pandemic unemployment assistance, if you need more information about that, click on this link. There were some questions about PUA that came in, and some of those have been answered. Basically, the question here is, if I take unemployment on pandemic unemployment insurance, and then I get paid next week, what do I do? Well, the answer to that is when you go in next week and fill out your paperwork to be eligible for unemployment that week, it's going to key off of the information you put in. So if you get a $1,000 check because you earned money next week, you go in for weekly unemployment, you claim that income, and your benefit through PUA or regular unemployment would be impacted by however much that amount is, up to including all the way down to being eligible for $0 of unemployment in any given week. Unclear, not really clear. The week thereafter, you go in again, you have more money, you don't have more money incoming as far as income, and that changes week to week. Congress did pass a bill originally to refill the PPP program. More importantly, let's see if I have it in the slide deck. Yes. Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips, Democrat, 3rd District, he introduced changes to the PPP program that would extend the forgiveness for expenses from 8-week period to a 24-week period. It also dispenses with the 75% FTE rule that allows forgiveness for the number of employees that kept on the payroll. It also eliminates the restriction that the loan be limited to 2 years, and instead takes that out to 5 and 10 years. And it does affirm that anyone that takes PPP loans will still get access to payroll tax deferment benefits, which was a separate program, but there was questions after PPP was passed, whether if someone took a PPP loan and also did payroll tax deferment, whether they were double dipping. This legislation makes sure and says specifically that payroll tax deferment and PPP loans can work together. And then it extends the rehiring deadline to December 31st. There was some concern that some of the shorter timelines in the original PPP program were making it very difficult for businesses. Backing up one page, if you or anyone you know that got the PPP loan needs a direct link to the forgiveness guidance, click here. It'll take you through the 11-page guidance on PPP loan forgiveness. Fill this out and get your, get it turned in and get your PPP loan forgiven as it was designed under the program. Understand that there may be a sliding scale. If you don't complete everything, you may be responsible for the repayment of some parts of the PPP loan. So these changes passed the U.S. House, and then it wasn't clear that the Senate was going to take up the bill exactly as the House had passed it, and they were saying they were going to write their own bill. But Dean Phillips and a Republican from Texas, Chip Roy, who offered the bill in the House, did such an amazing job at having kind of all the questions answered and getting the right fixes for the PPP program, that when the Senate went to take up and their own bill, they quickly figured out that it doesn't get much better than what the House had already proposed and passed. So that's headed to the president and expected to be signed shortly. NAR did support the changes to the PPP loan, and here was a letter from May 26th that said just that. And I also now understand that NAR has also sent a thank you letter to these representatives that have been involved, including Dean Phillips, for their amazing work on this program. Other CARES Act provisions: there are no student loan payments when it comes from the federal. If it's a federal government student loan, no payments for 6 months, no interest, no penalties. You may be able to access certain retirement funds if you need to set up a temporary budget during the pandemic. Please contact your plan administrator and work with your tax professional before you do so. The 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act did away with the charitable deduction for people that don't itemize, but the CARES Act added a $300 charitable deduction back for people that don't itemize for tax year 2020. So when you go to do taxes in 2021, you'll be able to claim $300 in charitable deductions. So please do give if you can, if you're able to give at this time, and know that there'll be a tax deduction benefit here. There's been some discussions that if there's been any further relief, that this is one of the items that would be added, and there's been some discussions about potentially increasing this amount. And then employee retention credit, these is mostly for people with payroll. Employee retention credit, and the delay of employee payroll taxes, and then the extension of many tax deadlines. The regular tax deadline, the 1031 deadline, tax opportunity zones have been extended to July 15th and more. The Minnesota legislature, $1.5 billion surplus. It became a $2.4 billion deficit. They did not pass a bonding bill. There was a $2 billion bonding bill attempted in the House on the last Saturday of the last week of session, and then a $1 billion bonding bill attempt in the Senate on the Sunday thereafter. And on the last day of the Monday, they could not act. So the undone list is bonding bill, a workers' pay raise ratification, legislative agreement on how to conduct oversight on CARES Act funding, which will be pretty important, economic aid and tax relief for the pandemic. Of course, this undone list was created prior to the incidences in Minneapolis, and so now this undone list tends to grow between now and the convening of a special session on Friday. The governor has the right to call a special session, but only the legislature itself can adjourn it. So that's an interesting power dynamic. And then in terms of how the state is set up, so that usually leads governors to get agreements ahead of time about what the full scope of a special session might be. And as you can imagine, with an undone list this long and the unrest in Minneapolis, this undone list grows, and that full scope of what could be discussed in a special session just tends to widen and grow and grow and grow, and it makes you wonder what issues would be off the table for discussion when at some point almost anything could fit some of these categories. The big question about whether the emergency powers will be extended, if the emergency powers are extended, then that would impact that eviction order. Here's some of the revenue numbers that walk you through how we got from a $1.5 billion deficit to a 3.6, or 1.5 surplus to a 3.6 deficit, or 2.4. So this is the change. So the individual income tax is down by 1.6. The general sales tax is down by 1.3 billion, for a total of $3.6 billion change. So so let's see if that next slide has it. Yes, $1.5 billion budgetary balance, a change of 3.611 downward. These two also changed. This is not the state's reserve. This is the stadium reserve, but that number's down. Estimated spending for COVID is actually up, and that doesn't help. And that helps drive the $2.4 billion in the hole here. So that's where the state ended up. Now, $2.4 billion in the hole. Minnesota does have a rainy day fund to the tune of 2.3. So pretty close. It's almost zero. So you could imagine a special session where they come in and all they do is say, okay, we're using all these funds to offset all of that, and we're gone. That's a pie in the sky approach. It's possible that it could occur. It's not very likely. How to balance this and the ability to use these funds to mitigate the impact needs to be legislated. They cannot appropriate these funds to backfill the hole without a discussion and without passing legislation to appropriate it and then do so. So just be aware of that. The mayor had an emergency order in Minneapolis, 2020-12, and this is anyone who's over age 2 and medically able to tolerate a face covering is required to do so in spaces of public accommodation. And it goes on to talk about what that is, where that is, and so it is a requirement in the city of Minneapolis to wear a mask within the guidelines and within the text here of this order. The city of Minneapolis, a lawsuit has been filed under the Minnesota Human Rights Act, and the lawsuit is going to attempt to address the systematic racism and discrimination in the Minneapolis Police Department. And the lawsuit is going to assess the disparities of protected classes, and the lawsuit scrutiny is supported by the Minneapolis City Council. And the legislature is also considering a number of policing reforms as well. And one small idea is to end the residency requirement ban for officers. Currently, there's a ban saying that you don't have, so in the case of Minneapolis, you can be a Minneapolis cop currently, police officer currently, and not live in the city of Minneapolis. One legislative idea, just one small legislative idea, would be to end that ban. So you'd, in that case, you would have to live in the city of Minneapolis. So there'll be a lot of reform ideas. There's been some reform ideas too, and you hear chants and talks and people asking to abolish the Minneapolis police, and then you see the Minneapolis mayor saying that he doesn't support abolishing the police, and then you see crowds booing him and telling him to go home. Let's all just take a moment, understand what that means, understand that this is going to be part of the public dialogue for some time about what reforms need to take place. I'm not going to comment one way or the other on what's a good policy and what's not. I think policing reform is a part of a wider community conversation that's not necessarily just specific to real estate, but just be aware that those conversations are going to be ongoing. And with that, Ann, was there a question that just popped up?
Yes, or a comment. It looks like Representative Pat Garofalo is working on changing arbitration.
Okay. Yep, that's probably from Leanne. She knows Pat quite well, and I'm sure she's on the call today. Hi, Leanne, how are you? Yeah, there'll be some changes at the Minnesota legislature. There's been some requests to change how the unions interact, how you deal with officers with multiple complaints. I mean, the Minneapolis City Council would like to have the union be less forceful and less successful in protecting officers that kind of they see as bad actors. There's been a number of those requests, and so you'll see, and especially as soon as a special session were to be called, you'll see a lot of discussion about what the ideas and answers are. Part of this order I didn't include in here today. It'll be in next week's, on a slide right after this for next week. But there were 5 things that the Minneapolis City Council has been told by this lawsuit that they need to do immediately. 2 of the 5 was, and one of them is, that they need to end all neck holds and choke holds immediately. And then the second one was any officer at any rank at any time that they observe a chokehold to be happening, they have to report it there, so that it makes the police officer a mandatory reporter, regardless if the person doing the choke holding is at a rank higher than the officer that observes it. They have to report it to the incident commander, that commander on the shift for that evening immediately. And then they also have to attempt to intervene, either physically or by saying, hey man, that's not allowed, stop, please, back off, be done with that hold. So they have to attempt to stop them. So there was 5 total things in this human rights lawsuit that were immediate, and those are just 3 examples. There were a couple others in there. The other one was the only people that could authorize crowd control or riot support control would be, the only ones that would be allowed to authorize that are the chief or the chief's designee. So just the chief or just the deputy chief or whoever the acting, whoever's in that role for that incident period. But that one would always go straight to the top. So 5 changes, 5 immediate changes coming right away in the face of this lawsuit. Lots of discussion here. Some things helpful, some things not. But just be aware that there's going to be a lot of conversations when it comes to that. Was there follow-up, Ann?
No, she was just responding to your hello.
Okay, great. So just kind of evolving and emerging issues. Obviously, systemic change is needed. The housing gaps in Minnesota are really quite high. Minnesota always ranks number 1, 2, or 3 in the country in any given survey about total home ownership. We have some of the highest home ownership rates in the country, exceeding 73, 74% at some point, but it's not evenly distributed amongst racial classes and other groups. And therefore, we have some of the highest housing gaps. When white home ownership is 74% and black home ownership is only 43 to 45%, there's a huge gap there. Some of the other evolving issues come from the financial issues. So, will there be a second round of stimulus is still a question. Is there going to be more guidance on our foreclosures and evictions? We're still waiting. Is there more state guidance on foreclosures and evictions? And yes, we're still waiting this week to see what happens with the governor's emergency peacetime orders. Does that get extended? And what implications does it have for evictions? And then just kind of the intersection of all these policy programs. The question I have here is, how do these policy programs play with each other? PPP, EIDL, PUA, on and on and on. We learned earlier in the slide that PPP does play well with the extension and deferment of payroll tax deferment. But that was a question at one point. So at one point it was, well, can you do PPP and payroll tax deferment? Well, the answer now in the changes from the Dean Phillips legislation that hopefully is going to be signed is that yes, PPP is going to play with the deferred payment for those benefits. And then will there be increased pay or benefits or calls for increased pay or benefits for frontline workers? This includes your stocker, not just your nurses and your healthcare providers, but also like your stockers at Walmart or the grocery store. I think you're going to continue to hear people be on these people's side, and there'll be a considerable amount of public discussion in this space. So, and with that, just kind of wrap up pretty early this week. If you guys have any questions on these issues, or you're following something and you don't understand, or you have a question at the local level, or if you have a question at the state level, or question at the NAR or congressional level, please contact me. Here's my email address and my phone number, and I'm available for you all and trying to get you the answers and the understanding that you need through these. And I'm not a big fan of it, but now with even more going on through these uncharted times. So if you have questions, just assume that you ask them and we get those answers out there. And with that, maybe, Ann, do we have questions?
I'm not seeing any questions at the moment.
Okay.
So maybe give it another second in case somebody's trying to type. But like Eric said, you guys can always reach out to him after this is over.
So yeah, keep an eye out for any changes to in-person classes. Know that the Minnesota Department of Commerce has not changed your CE licensing deadline. And know that the Minneapolis Association of Realtors, working with the state and the St. Paul Association of Realtors, is going to come out with some messaging, a website, and some resources for members, and a kind of a direction on where we go from here, really, is kind of what they're answering, and so much more about what needs to happen in terms of reconciliation in Minneapolis and rebuilding and the future of some of these sites that have been impacted, not only through COVID, but then with the following civil unrest. And there's going to be a long sustained effort. Carrie is a fan of saying this is a marathon, not a sprint, and I couldn't agree more. So, did I see another question?
Yep. Question is, will the defund Minneapolis Police Department go anywhere?
I have a real hard time with that one. You do see a story today about a majority of the council backing a defund approach. It's not as radical as idea as you might want to think. There are other cities in the country that have taken dramatically different done dramatically different things when it comes to community policing. One city that comes to mind is Seattle. Went through a large-scale decriminalization of petty drug offenses and petty nonviolent crimes. So, and there's some stories you can follow on YouTube to kind of give you an update on how those things went. There was some backlash as well. So some of these cities have taken these actions, decriminalizing everything from loitering to, just all these low-level offenses, and decriminalized a lot of things. and then there's a significant backlash that occurs as well. So I have a hard time. And then you see Mayor Fry, and Mayor Fry is solely responsible for who the chief of police is. The city of Minneapolis a year or so ago tried to change that. They wanted to pass an ordinance that made the boss of the chief of police all 13 members of the city council, and the mayor disagreed with that and was able to push back on that, and that did not pass at the time. So I actually, my thought is that cooler heads are going to prevail on this, and that an actual defund the police plan is not likely to occur. Now, if you ask me in the very next question, are there going to be substantial changes to the way the Minneapolis police force approaches law enforcement and community policing, and is that what's needed? I would say yes, absolutely. There are going to be large-scale changes to how policing in Minneapolis is done. That I can tell you there's something's coming on that front. Is it going to look like a full defund of the Minneapolis Police Department? I have my doubts, but I also am willing to be wrong and witness that. So, other questions?
Yeah, looks like we had another one come in asking or saying, apparently the city council has a veto-proof vote. Will the council move forward?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. These are very good questions, and some of that's all just yet to be seen. And I mean, your guess is as good as mine on that. It is something we'll be following and we'll be figuring out. And then if they do pass that, if that's what comes to be, and they do want to defund, the bigger question is, what does that mean, and what do you replace? Okay, so if you defund the police, what gets put in place in its place, and if anything, or is there a vacuum there, or whatever else? So those are all the questions they're going to have to deal with. I don't necessarily disagree with the sentiment. I mean, definitely, we have to understand how people feel. We know people are hard pressed at this time, and they've faced this time after time. They're frustrated that they've tried to make changes time after time, and then those changes don't take hold. So I wouldn't, with this council and their tendencies on legislating, they are activists. They do prefer to do something than to not do something. So if they were to go forward with this and push it through, it wouldn't surprise me that they acted instead of not acting. I guess the bigger question I have would be, if you go down that road, what do you put in its place? You can't, in my mind, you can't just leave a vacuum. But it would be very interesting to see what direction that does go. Any more questions?
I'm not seeing any at the moment.
I guess maybe I'll just wrap up too with, I know, again, I kind of said it before, the community policing discussions will be kind of partly our focus and partly in our sphere, but not fully. I think they're part of a wider, broader community conversation about the residents of Minneapolis, who lives there, and what we want out of policing in Minneapolis. It's a big discussion. It's a big space. I think a lot of people have to be heard before decisions are going to be, hard and fast decisions can be made. I do think the council's going to think action is better than inaction. Clearly, the situation kind of warrants that. But other than that, just the only other thing I will say is this issue, while wider and very important, is kind of begins to be on outskirts. It's not. So the Realtors Government Affairs Committee I'll follow it on your behalf, but you're not likely. It's not necessarily a real estate issue. It's a wider community policing discussion. So I don't anticipate that our Government Affairs Committee would take a stand or send a letter in saying that this type of community policing or that type of community policing or let's do this and let's do that. And the reason is those just aren't real estate policy issues. We try to keep our focus on real estate policies impact issues. Does it impact everybody? Yes. Are we talking about human lives? Yes. Is how people are treated and policed in Minneapolis primarily a real estate issue? No, it's a bigger, wider community issue. So just want people to kind of be aware of where we would or wouldn't engage there. So.
And then another question just came through. Will we take a position as realtors with regard to defunding and eliminating the police department? You might have already kind of touched on that a
Yeah,
little
I wouldn't, I mean, we would probably review, I would bring this information forward. The city of Minneapolis is planning to do X, Y, Z. The committee would look at it, and then the committee would make a recommendation or not, that one, is this an issue that realtors should be concerned about? 2, is it primarily a real estate issue? 3, do we need to take a position here? Is that the right, are we the right group? Is this the right venue, place, time? All those things would be considered. If they did, then that recommendation goes from the Government Affairs Committee to the board, and the board would have the same conversation. So I think we're in front of that a little bit, and I think there's not a lot of information about what the replacement plan would look like. So I don't anticipate, I'll bring the documents forward to the committee, but I don't anticipate, it's a little cart before the horse. I don't anticipate us taking an immediate position on that issue at this time, but we're definitely going to continue to follow it and stay abreast of the situation in Minneapolis. Anything else?
Right, yeah, I'm not seeing anything else at the moment. Thank you for a lot of great information again today, Eric.
Yep, appreciate it. Thank you everyone for being on the call. And I think we're gonna have at least one more of these, and then there may be a format change, so stay tuned. So I do want to thank our partners and our sponsors. They were on that front part of the slide. If I can go all the way back, I guess I might have missed that today. We do. Yes, Bell Bank and Mortgage, North Star MLS, Royal Credit Union, and Supra. And so without these sponsors and their support of our programs, we just couldn't deliver this content without their support. We appreciate everything they do for the real estate industry and your consumers. So with that, everybody, thank you so much. Have a great day.